This week on Modern Maker, we are going to be building a DIY walnut charcuterie board with an epoxy river down the middle. I think you're gonna like this one. Let's get into the video. So what we got here on the workbench is just a rough cut walnut slab. So we're gonna cut a little section off of this. That is going to be our board. Gonna rip it through the middle. We're gonna flip the sides inside out essentially. Put it in a mold, pour our river, let it harden for a few days. So first, what we got to do is I'm going to cut off this splitting that we have at the end of the board here. So I'm going to cut this off and then cut about an 18-inch section that we're going to use to create our board. Does anybody ever have issues with their Milwaukee circular saw? So my light comes on, fully charged battery. Nothing. Sometimes I give it a little hit. She'll fire up. And now we work. Somebody explain it. Also, quick tip. If you're cutting a piece of wood that is about 2+ inches thick, you should do it in a couple passes. But who's got time for that? So next what we're going to do is we're going to cut this in half, and then we have to determine how much of the middle we want to cut out, because again we need to have room in the middle of the two pieces for our epoxy. So it'll make more sense in a minute. Let's move over to the table saw. All right, so as we mentioned, we got that slab now cut in half. So let's place it into our form, and it's gonna start giving us a visual of what's gonna look like in the end. And then again, we can assess how much we wanna cut off of each side to perfect how our river will look. So as you can see, these aren't even gonna fit because they're too big as of now. So let's just start, let's cut 1.5 inches off of both of our outer ends, because again, our river is going to be shaped by this natural bark that the tree had. Once we have all of our pieces cut to size, next we're going to put them in the form, flipping them around, trying to figure out which layout we like best for our finished board. Once we have a layout we're happy with, the next step is very important. We need to sand off that thin layer left by the bark. If we leave it on, the epoxy is going to stick to that thin papery layer rather than seep into the wood, which will give us a strong bond. I know I should plane these down first and then put them in there, planed, flattened, and everything. I know I should do that. I don't have time. I do have a commitment this weekend out of town. It's getting late and I need to get this poured today. That way when I come back next week, the epoxy is good and hard, because it does take 3, sometimes 4 days to fully cure, depending on the temperature, humidity in the shop, etc. So again, before you guys start commenting, I know I should plane these down first. I don't have time. I'm just going to do it after. So let's get these placed into the mold. Start mixing up our epoxy. All right, it's time to pour. I need 60 ounces. I calculated it to fill this entire thing. So somehow I only have this bucket that's clean. So this is a 24-ounce bucket. We're gonna do 3 of these pours. So let's get to mixing. Again, it's a 2-part. So I'm going to do, ultimately, in the 60 ounces, I'll do 40 ounces of part A, 20 ounces of part B. It's a 2-to-1. We do have all of these pigments. So, and again, you can just get these on Amazon. There's all of these colors. Another pack here with a bunch of colors, as well as a bunch more. I'm gonna go for almost like a smoky black look, so almost transparent with a tint of a smoke color. So we're just gonna put a little bit of black pigment in there. We'll play with it and see until we get that desired smoke look. So let's start the first of the 3 pours. Here we are mixing the 2-part epoxy, and this one calls for a 2-to-1 ratio. It's important we mix the epoxy thoroughly before we add any pigment. So I'm just going to add about that much for now, and we'll see where that gets us. Again, just pop it in there. But I think that's what we're after. I think that with the walnut is going to look quite well. It will get a little bit darker as we build up in depth. So again, that was just 1 of 3 buckets, so anticipate this to darken up a little bit, but I think overall it looks pretty slick. So again, let's do that 2 more times. All right, so we got those first 2 batches in, and one thing that happens as we fill this up with this liquid is the slabs tend to float. So just keep that in mind when you're mixing that last batch. It might look like it's going to be a little bit too much, but it is in fact just the right amount, obviously, if you calculate it correctly. So as you can see, there's a lot of bubbles starting to form that you bring in. So that's, again, the air rising to the top. So before we pour this last batch, we're just going to take a quick propane torch and just run it by real quick, and it's going to pop all of these bubbles. And again, we want to do that before we pour each batch, just so we're not trapping those bubbles in. Let's get this 3rd batch poured in here, and then what we're going to do is we're going to set something on top of this to weigh it down to make sure our slabs don't float up. So let's get to it. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to take a popsicle stick and we're just going to run it along here, mix these all together. Obviously we did 3 separate batches. I didn't exactly weigh out all my pigment, so let's just get them all mixed together. That way we don't see any lines of the different batches in the final product. All right, so what we're gonna do is we made these 2 blocks with this tuck tape. Again, the epoxy does not stick to this tape. So we're gonna pop these last holes. And then carefully push these down so we don't overflow. We're going to place these blocks in the center of both of our slabs here. All right, so as I said, we got the 2 blocks on there. We got this heavy bucket of bolts on top to make sure those 2 slabs don't rise up. And again, we put tuck tape on those blocks that way, because obviously the epoxy will not be sticking to that. And then we just took a popsicle stick, mixed together those 3 batches just to make sure everything was mixed in together pretty well. But yeah, now, again, we can monitor this, make sure we have no leaks in our form, and then periodically come back and pop these bubbles on the top layer. All right, so it has been about 2.5-ish days. So again, here we are. We got our slab here. As you guys can see, it hardened up nicely. It took a lot less time than I thought, probably because it's been a little bit warmer outside. But yeah, so now we're gonna get this out of the mold. All right, next step on the charcuterie board. So we got our planer here, just your standard DeWalt benchtop planer. We got it hooked up to the shop vac. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get some duct tape and just duct tape around here so this doesn't fly off once we start getting some airflow. So obviously, we're just gonna run this through until we get this top flat. There's a bit of a lip because we had that little bit of leak out. So we're gonna get this top planed flat. Once that's flat, we're gonna hit the bottom. And again, we want this to ideally be as thick as possible, but still be flat on both sides. So it's a messy job, as I'm sure you're aware if you have a planer. So shop vac helps a lot, doesn't catch everything. All right, so we ran this first side through the planer. We got it dead flat, as you can see. So now all we got to do is again flip it over, and now we're going to run this side back through. So let's just repeat the same process until we get a board that's totally flat that we can start sanding. Before we get to sanding, we want to cut our board to rough dimensions first by ripping it over on the table saw, followed by cutting it to length on the miter saw. Now we're at everyone's favorite part, sanding. I won't bore you with more time lapse of me simply sanding, but no, we sanded all the sides, working our way through the grits. In between each grit, we cleaned the board with some mineral spirits and got a sneak peek of what the product would look like finished. And about halfway through sanding, we do a slight round over to soften all of our edges, followed by our final finish sanding. To finish these, I like to use a food grade oil because a lot of people are obviously using these for charcuterie boards, for serving trays, some cutting boards, etc. It's going to be in food contact. So we use Odie's oil on these. I like it builds up a little bit of a sheen, a really thick protective layer, and again, it's a food safe finish. That is going to do it for this week's video. Make sure you guys like, subscribe, comment down below any future builds you want to see on the channel. We do have some really cool videos coming up, so make sure again you're subscribed and hit the bell for notifications when we upload. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.